it.
You get it.
Your body heals from the head down and from the inside out. So some of the first areas to be affected when you go into healing crisis are going to be like the stomach and the large and small intestines. So you get a person on a good heavy program, what can you expect? Well, nausea, diarrhea, constipation, black stools, corn fuzzies, tumors, you name it. You can expect a tremendous amount of symptomology in the entire digestive tract. Okay? How many of you have experienced this? Okay, the rest of you need to take more minerals.
What happens, Doug, when you get constipated on the program?
You're speaking from personal experience. Well, speaking from personal experience, I get grumpy, but beyond that, David, the thing to realize is, for many people who get on the program, will find that the bowels are working like far more frequently in a day than they generally work in a week. So for most people, the bowels everything is going to be flowing very, very freely. But there will be some people who will get extreme constipation on the program, even when they're doing everything right. Even when they're eating a very good diet, taking plenty of supplements, drinking plenty of water, and all the rest, they will still get constipated. I know because I was one of them.
What'd you do?
Healing crisis. Take a person that's been constipated most of their life. That's what they have to go back through, is being constipated. I was on this program very, very thoroughly. I mean, like probably eating like 80 or 90% fresh and raw, tons of minerals and enzymes and all the rest, for about a year and a half before my bowels really worked properly, by which I mean I was having like, a couple of bowel movements a day without any problem. Took me that long on a program. But I've been constipated for 25 years before that, all my life. So the thing about it is you may get constipated on the program. You may get more constipated than you even remember having been. Does that happen to anybody here?
Yeah.
It won't be that many, but you'll find a few. You'll find a few people that have been very constipated. You may have to go through a lot of that. It's healing crisis. Enjoy it. And don't just focus on the physical. Don't just focus on whether you pooped today or not, but look at the emotions, look at the words. I'm very serious there. I'm always very serious. Look at the emotions, look at the word patterns, and look at the thought patterns, because that's often going to be what's at the bottom of it. It generally will be.
What is constipation?
Constipation is when you can't poop. No, seriously, constipation is basically, a person is not pooping regularly. Which, by the way, is about 99% of the people in the Western world. But ideally, if you eat 3 meals a day, you should have 3 bowel movements a day. Easy, regular bowel movements without any problem. And your bowel movements should generally occur pretty soon after you've eaten. You won't be pooping out that meal, but generally speaking, when the bowel is working properly, you should have a bowel movement 20 or 30 minutes after you eat. Yeah. And you should have as many bowel movements a day as you have meals. Now, how many people here in this room can say that that's true of them?
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting a few here. How many people was that true of them before they got on the program? Okay, well that's pretty good actually, because most people consider it fairly normal. I talk to most people. I say, "Are you regular?" And most people consider themselves regular because they have 1 poop a day, 1 bowel movement a day. Most people consider that pretty good. I know people who consider themselves lucky to have 3 or 4 a week. So constipation is a relative thing here, but it's a very common thing. Yes.
If you do have a tendency to constipation on the program, is it a good idea to have some sort of herbal laxatives or that?
Herbal laxatives, this is getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but herbal laxatives in the long run will do more harm than good.
Yeah.
Because they work just the same as any other laxative works. They're an irritant that the system is trying to expel.
I'm just talking about a short term.
Short term, they have their place.
What about an
Enemas have their place as well, but eventually you gotta get off your bag there. You gotta let the bowels work on their own.
I haven't really tried to the recently. That's too much.
Well, that's not necessarily what killed her, but I do know people that get a little enema happy. The thing to realize is...
Could be an enema finish.
What's the question back there?
I think there's a difference here between a medical point of view and a fetish, though, isn't there?
Well, no, I mean, yes, I think there is, but I'm saying from a purely practical point of view here, it is possible to be doing too many enemas and too many colonics, because you do need to allow the system to work on its own eventually. Now, you take somebody that's dying of cancer and is trying to detoxify the body. Under those circumstances, you do whatever you can to keep the colon rolling. Okay? You do, I mean, you know, there are situations in which it's going to be perfectly appropriate to do several colonics or several enemas daily. Because it's disastrous if the body's trying to detoxify and the stuff's not making it out the colon. So there are situations in the short run where the herbal laxatives will have their place, where the extremely frequent enemas and colonics will have their place. There's no question in my mind that that will be appropriate in some circumstances, but it shouldn't become your way of life. Mel?
What about rubbing the fasciolata to help the peristalsis of the bowel?
That can be very, very helpful, and also holding points on it. The fasciolata is that muscle. Remember, John had you all stand up and feel along the sides of your legs there. That's a reflex for the large intestine, and massage, reflex or acupressure, as well as body electronics on that will have very beneficial effects on the colon. Yes. Question?
Just a suggestion.
It will help the peristalsis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Chris mentioned then the Oxymag was part of the program.
Mm-hmm.
It obviously
That tends to keep things moving, doesn't it? The question is, the Oxymag, does that keep things moving? And I guess the answer would be yes. The Oxymag seems to be very, very, sometimes, you may sometimes see it labeled homozone, but it's the same thing.
What about the Eastern way of squatting? Physiologically,
Yes.
in comparison to our way of sitting on the toilet.
Do you all know what the question is? The question is regarding the position that you recline upon the throne. Do y'all know what a diverticulum is?
Yes.
Y'all know that?
Yes.
Anybody not know it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. You have in the intestines. This actually will work throughout the digestive system, but let's look at the colon for now. You will have a series of muscle structures that will, be moving along the length of the colon, and inside that you will have the mucus lining, like the lining of the intestines. A diverticulum is where the lining is basically herniated out through the muscles. So you have this little kind of like pouch there, and that pouch will get filled up with encrusted fecal matter, and then eventually sealed off with scar tissue. The pouch itself is called a diverticulum. The medical condition, if you have these, it's called diverticulosis. We'll get into that a little bit later, but with respect to squatting, in countries where people squat to defecate, you will not find the high incidence of diverticuli in the descending colon. You will find that it's a much greater problem in the Western countries or in the areas of the world where people sit like this to have a bowel movement. You will find a much greater problem with the diverticulosis as a result of the posture in which you try to have a bowel movement. The squatting posture is a much more natural posture to have a bowel movement in. It's a lot easier. It's a lot less strain on the system. I would highly recommend it for all of you. If you're sufficiently agile, what I've been doing for about 10 years is I stand on the seat, and that works perfectly good. That works perfectly well for me. I guess I've got good balance. I've never fallen in yet. There are also for some of you that may find that that's challenging as a result of for whatever reason. There are things that you can do to approximate that. You can get some sort of stool or something that you have in front of the seat to at least get your legs up a bit. Get your knees up, and that will help. That will be very helpful. Karen?
You can buy
buy a product now that you can put your feet on that sits on both sides
Yeah.
around the toilet. Also, a Polynesian person told me that if you're sitting on the toilet, that you hold your hands above your head.
That will definitely help.
Help too.
Yeah. Of course, for some people who are standing on the lid, that may be a little bit too much. That both ends it up. Lose the balance. Okay, so I think we've established that we want to squat to poop if we can. Yeah.
Where do they show up in the eye, these troubles?
What's that?
Where do they show up in the eye?
What? We'll get to that. We're still on the pupillary frill. They'll be out in zone 2. We'll move to that. Other questions on the ulcers? Okay, next slide. Okay, we got a few more up here. You can see a number of kind of a whole range up there of the black out pouchings there. Okay, I do want to show you one thing in this eye. This is kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but it is kind of a good example of this. And I guess we're not being that linear anyway. You all see this right here?
Yeah.
Okay, this has these types of kind of brown pigmentation spots. They've got a number of different names. I usually refer to them as pigment spots. The Jensen terminology is they're usually referred to as a psora. P-S-O-R-A. P-S-O-R-A. Or sometimes a psoric itch spot. P-S-O-R-I-C, itch spot. So either a psora or a psoric itch spot. How many of you have these in your eyes here? Okay, this is the Iridology Week is a wonderful week for healing crisis. So especially when you have a lot of people in the class that have the little self-analysis mirrors. So I'm perfectly serious on this. It's a very wonderful week for healing crisis because a lot of times you're going to be hearing things about these eyes up there, and then you're going to be kind of looking at your own eye, and it's going to start to look a little familiar up there, and then you're going to start to pay real close attention to what whatever landmark we're talking about means up there. So I want to talk about these pigment spots here. Whenever you see a pigment spot here, like this, and these will range in color from kind of a medium brown to a dark brown to a black, whenever you see these pigment spots, at the very least, you have the accumulation of toxins and inorganic toxic materials settling out in those tissues. Inorganic minerals. Minerals in the body need to be in an organic form, in a chelated form, from plants. Pure elements that are not in a organic form. Different types of things that the body has not been able to metabolize and break down. Simple analogy here. We all have stuff coming into the body every day, right? And then we have stuff coming in through the food, through the air, through the water, and also through various types of environmental exposures. I mean, through the skin. Yep. So there's stuff coming into the body on a daily basis. There will be toxins contained in a lot of this. There's toxins in the food, toxins in the air, toxins in the water. So we have a number of toxins that are also coming in through the skin. There are also going to be toxins that are actually generated in the body itself as various substances are broken down and metabolized. So we're all exposed to toxins on a continual daily basis, no way around it. The body has systems of detoxification and elimination that are there to deal with this. You've got your liver, which certainly bears a lot of the burden. You've got your kidney urinary system. You've got your colon. You've got the skin, which is an organ of elimination. You've got the respiratory system, the lungs, which would be an organ of elimination. You've also got the lymphatic system, which doesn't really have its own, shall we say, exit point from the body, but also works as part of your, detoxification and elimination system. And there's various other organs and tissues that will play a function here. Under the best of circumstances, shall we say, in a healthier, less polluted world, hopefully an individual would be able to keep ahead of the game. They'd be able to detoxify and eliminate the toxins as quickly as they were being introduced into the body. In this day and age, that's not happening most of the time anymore. Most of us are accumulating toxins for the simple reason that our body is not able to keep ahead of the rate at which they're coming in. They're either coming into the body or being generated in the body quicker than the body is capable of getting rid of them. By the way, once you sort of go over the break there, once you start to accumulate toxins, the situation actually begins to compound, because as the body gets weaker and weaker, it gets even less capable of eliminating toxins. So to make a long story short, we start to accumulate toxins in the body. Does this make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, now this doesn't apply to any of you here, but you're going to be dealing with people that will apply to. Now, yes?
I hope it doesn't matter where that spot is.
It certainly does. Yes, this will be in the spine here, which we'll get to in a second. Okay? Very definitely the location of the pigment spot is going to tell you where the toxins are. Question there?
With reflexing, if it can reflex 30 degrees, does that mean it can move them towards the pupil and out?
Generally speaking, the zone will be fairly exact. It's going, it's going like, clockwise or counterclockwise. That's what we mean by 30 degrees. Now, where do toxins settle out in an individual? Okay, toxins will settle out in the tissues of greatest weakness. Now, what will determine, we'll forget about thought, word, and emotion here for just a moment. On a physical level, because obviously it's the thought, word, and emotion that determine what's going on here in the physical. But on a physical level, what will determine the tissues of relative weakness, the tissues of greatest weakness? Okay, genetics is going to be a big factor here. Okay, genetics will be a major factor in determining the tissues that will be affected. Certain substances, certain toxic substances will also have particular affinities for certain tissues, so that is another factor. Mercury, for example, tends to target the pituitary, the thyroid, and so forth. So there is also that factor. Certain substances, I don't want to go into, be too exhaustive about that, but certain substances will have an affinity for certain tissues. Solvents, for example, a lot of the inhaled solvents will have a particular affinity for the brain tissue.
And the lungs.
And the lungs. So you'll get people that work in like cabinet shops and work with a lot of paints and fumes and lacquers and shellacs and all the rest. You get a lot of stuff in the a lot of inhaled solvents will affect the brain. So there is that factor as well. But genetics is going to be a major determining factor here, and also injuries. I mean, think of people, for example, that develop arthritis in a particular joint that they've actually injured. They get it in the right knee but not the left knee because the right knee is the one that was injured. So your personal history is also going to determine what the weakest tissues are. Does that make sense to everyone here?
Yeah.
Okay. So at the very least, we've got toxins settling out in the body. Now, as toxins settle out in the relatively weaker tissues, what happens to those tissues? Well, they get weaker, right? They start to go downhill. You basically have shall we say, a downward spiral that starts to take place in these relatively weaker tissues. These tissues, right from the start, have a diminished degree of nerve supply and circulation. I mean, that's virtually what defines them as relatively weaker tissues, correct? They already from the start have a lesser degree of nerve supply and circulation. I mean, that's pretty much what defines them as relatively weaker tissues in that individual. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Once the toxins start to accumulate, the weak get weaker. I mean, these tissues start to go downhill even more. And so what you will start to see developing these tissues is a whole host of other secondary conditions. You're going to see lymphatic congestion to a greater degree in those tissues. You're, of course, going to see the accumulation of toxins. You're going to see the gradual lowering of the electrical potential or the vibratory rate or the life force in those tissues. So what is this going to do as far as parasites and bacteria and viruses? It's going to create a wonderful host condition that will encourage them. The welcome mat is out. Okay, so you're going to then start, somewhere along the line, you're going to start to see the proliferation of the viruses and the bacteria. You're going to start to see the anaerobic condition in these tissues. You're going to, in other words, the low oxygen states in these tissues, which is going to bring it even further downhill. And it's a real snowball effect. You all see that? So these tissues are going to go downhill, and they're going to go downhill faster and faster and faster as long as the downward spiral continues. Somewhere along the line, what will often develop will be cancer. Abnormal tissue will begin to proliferate in that area. So we have a basic continuum here of the weak tissues getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Now, when you look at these pigment spots here, as I said, at the very least, you're dealing with the accumulation of toxins in that area. As the situation gets worse and worse and worse, you're dealing with abnormal tissue and eventually with actual tumor formation in that area. The degree of severity, when you're dealing with the pigment spot here with the psora, the degree of severity is not indicated by the size of the spot. It's indicated by the color, by the darkness. The darker it is, the more severe the problem. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
Size is not really that major of a factor here.
What about shape?
So the psora, that's what it is.
Psora, the psora, yes.
The psora.
Yes. The size is not really that big of a deal because certain organs and glands take up different sizes in the eye.
What about shape of it?
Not the size of the darkness.
The darkness will be important. The shape will be important because what you'll see in some of them is you'll see some of them where they have like little feelers sticking off them.
Yeah.
Like some of them will have gone from being more or less a self-contained shape to where they've kind of got little appendages sticking out, little feelers. Yeah, that one does to some extent. You'll see it far more pronounced in some.
The black bush.
Right, what John refers to as a black bush, where you get like a dark black pigment spot that's real solid. You can't see through it, and it's got little feelers sticking out. That's going to indicate not just a tumor, but a tumor that's no longer contained. You basically got the feelers indicating that the tumor is starting to spread out. Is this making sense to everyone?
Yes.
So when you see the pigment spots in your own eye, if you see them, the thing that you want to look for is how dark are they. When you see like a black pigment spot, you have a homework assignment there. You got something you want to work on. Something that's very easily taken care of. Okay? I mean, we've already had people. How many people here have already overcome cancer? Okay? And there's going to be more of you by the end of the month. Okay? So this is not to get you all agitated and concerned. It's just to let you know what you might have in store here. Okay? The degree of darkness of the spot. Over in Germany, iridology is much more acceptable in the mainstream of medical practice than it is in most places in the world. And with typical German efficiency, they've done a lot of very thorough scientific investigations of what different iris signs mean. And one of the studies that they did was specifically what is indicated by these pigment spots. And they did a study where they did 10,000. They autopsied 10,000 cadavers, and they found that wherever they had a pigment spot, there was at least some degree of abnormal tissue presence. You may not have had an out-and-out tumor there, but you definitely had abnormal tissue present to some extent wherever you had a pigment spot. Did everybody get that?
Yeah.
10,000 cadavers. Okay, so I'd say that's probably pretty accurate there. Okay? Now again, it's like, you look around this room here, there's going to be dozens of you that will have pigment spots. How common do you think cancer is, by the way?
Very common.
Very common. Very, very common. Many people walking around out there assuming themselves to be perfectly healthy who have cancer. in one or more areas of the body here. Okay? We learn that we have a problem, we deal with it. Question there.
Yeah, cancer does show up in the eye. You've got it, you're going to see a spot of some sort.
You're not necessarily going to see a pigment spot. That's a good question, though. The pigment spot will indicate a problem, but there are many, many instances of cancer where there will not be a corresponding pigment spot. In other words, the pigment spot, like say if you see a black pigment spot, that's going to indicate probably a tumor. But there are also many, many instances where there definitely is a tumor and there isn't a pigment spot. It's indicated some other way in the eye. Did everybody follow that? I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you. Did everybody follow that?
Yes.
Okay.
Donna,
Yes, sir.
given that is as it is, will a pigment spot appear when the time is right for it from that specific condition that isn't shown in the pigment spot at the beginning? Very honest way of putting it.
Yeah, and it kind of went in one ear and out the other up to my Scotch Welch ears here, so try one more time. I didn't understand the question.
Sorry. Once the pigment spot is not showing, and there is cancer in some part of the body, when the cancer develops, will that then show a pigment spot?
Not necessarily. I've seen many, many instances of people that had cancer and there was never a pigment spot there. There would generally be, upon close observation, some type of abnormality, maybe just in the iris fibers themselves.
I see.
So it's not a universal marker. It's an accurate marker in the sense that the pigment spot will show the tumor, but it's not accurate in saying that there will always be a pigment spot for the tumor if there is a tumor. It only appears to work in one direction. Okay? One of the things that you will find, by the way, in some instances, and you see it right here, you see this kind of inflamed area, this white area running up and down like that? That will correspond. Excuse me. That will correspond to the that will correspond to the spine as it's shown in the chart there, pretty exactly. And when you see white inflamed fibers there, you're going to be dealing with pain in the body. When you see the white inflamed fibers like that, you're going to be dealing with pain in the body. You're going to be dealing with a hyperactive condition. When you're dealing with a hyperactive condition, an overactive condition there,
Are they associated with the spot?
in this case they are, yes. And when you see a pigment spot that is going to be surrounded by the white fibers, you're dealing with what could be termed active degeneration. Active degeneration. Things are going downhill fast here. Last legs here. Okay? Active degeneration.
Say it again.
When you see the pigment spot, which in and of itself would indicate a problem, and then it's surrounded by the bright white fibers, you're dealing with pain there. I mean, the bright white fibers will indicate a degree of pain and a degree of hyperactivity, and yet in this case you have an underlying degenerative condition, so you'll call this an active degeneration. I mean, like in other words, you can have a person that has cancer and doesn't even know it, and you can have a person who has cancer who's in a tremendous amount of pain in that area.
Yeah.
So you have active degeneration.
Without numbness, though.
What's that?
Without difference.
You get down low enough, and you go down far enough, and you're going to feel the pain. I mean, there would be many people who will have cancer and not even know they have it, but when they get to the point where they're really going downhill fast, there will be pain. There's a painful level of unconsciousness, after all. Okay? This particular individual did have, according to John's notes here, did have diagnosed cancer of the spine and did actually eventually pass on from that. So I guess the ulcer wasn't the main problem here. Going back to the pupillary drill. What's that? Okay, let's hit.
Wait just a minute.
Okay.
I understood from what John said, that on the outside of the eye represented the front of the body and the center of the eye, and then the right eye is the back. That's on the back.
That's a lift on.
No, that's the right eye.
This will be a left eye. It's very hard to tell sometimes from the slides because in this particular case you really can't see either of the canthus. The canthi.
The pupil's closer to the
What?
medium. That's the right.
Left eye.
The pupil is closer to the right
The
side.
pupil can vary. The pupil will not always be medial. This, according to John's notes and John's knowledge of the case history of this individual, is definitely cancer of the spine.
Okay.
So I would assume that this would be a left eye, given what we see up here.
Okay.
Let me put this into context here. This is only going to be an issue in seminars. In real life, you're going to know whether it's a left eye or a right eye. just to put it in context. But occasionally, because of the way the slides are cropped, you can't really see enough to know. So let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that it is a left eye here. But your point is well taken.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay. I believe Mimi was next there.
I just want to ask you, when there is regeneration,
Yes.
you get the fibers through the solid spot.
The fibers will start to come up, but the spot is usually really in front of the fibers. What will happen is that as the condition heals, is the spot will actually get lighter in color, and it may eventually disappear. By the way, I don't know how many of you caught this last week. For many, many years, it has been rigidly maintained by virtually all iridologists out there that pigment spots will not change. And even the few that say that they may change a little would still say that they would never, ever, ever disappear. And this is what Jensen's been teaching for many, many years. Jensen has always taken the position with a number of different types of, changes like this. In the past, he has not said that it's absolutely impossible. He has just simply said, "I've never seen it." And again, you figure in Jensen's case, he's probably looked at 500,000 eyeballs or whatever. My understanding from somebody that I know who has a good friend who's been studying with Jensen in just the last couple of years, is that Jensen is now teaching that pigment spots will in fact lighten up and disappear. He is saying that it doesn't happen very often, and only when people are doing some serious detoxification and some serious regeneration of the body. So we're making some progress here.
Yep.
Carol,
Yeah, I just wanted to help people.
did that answer your whole question there, maybe?
Yes, more or less.
Okay, the pigment spot will change, but it's primarily in front of the fibers. Yes.
We were told in class that the pupil was close to the nose. So always in a photograph like that, if you look, pupil is closer to the right-hand side, so therefore if you put it in reverse, that's where it is close to the nose.
It generally will be, but that's not going to be true 100% of the time. Like I said, in real life, you're going to know if it's a left eye or a right eye because you're going to have the person there.
You always ask.
What's that?
This must be a left eye if it is that spine in that position.
We're gonna assume it's a left eye here, okay? Paul. Okay, one at a time, please. Paul has the floor.
Okay, Doug, I've seen, the soric spot or the pigmentations that you've seen, you're saying that they're more or less sitting up above the iris a little. Now, what do you get where you get the fibers and they're moving up and they open up like this, okay, and it's black in there, degenerated. It's the pigmentation is definitely there. I've seen
That will be a different situation because the black, what you're going to see in many cases is you're going to see an area where the iris fibers are like spread apart and there's like a black hole there.
So that's my idea of this.
But that's different than a pigment spot. There's darkness from the absence of something being there. I mean, in other words, the fibers are spread out and there's a gap there. And whatever fibers ought to be there have completely sunk back into the pigment layer and become dark black in color themselves. So that basically you just see black because there's nothing there. Right, and that will fill in with fibers as the fibers lighten up and move up from the back. But you also have a situation which is different of a black pigment spot where now the black is not the absence of something, but it's the presence of the pigmentation. Right, exactly. And the pigmentation is going to be anterior to the iris fibers. It's going to be in front of the iris fibers. Does everybody follow that?
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty, I guess we got ourselves another ulcer here. We've got a couple pigment spots here, which we'll ignore for the time being. Okay, what's that? And this will be a left eye. I think we can probably all agree on that. Okay, go on to the next one here. Alrighty, looks like we've got a very, very thick, I don't know how clearly you can see it from where you are, but in addition to the, the probable ulcerative conditions, you'll notice that overall the pupillary frill is incredibly thick. So you're probably dealing with problems throughout the entire stomach lining there. It's a very, very, shall we say, a very irregular pupillary frill. Very dark and irregular.
Someone stole my photo.
One of the things, get you in a second, one of the things that you're going to see when you have an extremely irregular pupillary frill is this will tend to be a person that will have, shall we say, more than their usual share of emotional reactive patterns. I mean, granted we all have reactive patterns, right from the start, but there will be certain individuals in which this will be a lot more obvious. They'll be much more, shall we say, stuck in their patterns, to where they would appear to be a person that was really, shall we say, a little aberrant. And so when you have a very irregular pupillary frill, you're going to see a very high degree of emotional reactivity in that individual. Yes?
Yeah, what's the random sclera?
Well, we'll get to that, but generally speaking, when you see a lot of the brown out here in the sclera, you see this ring out here?
Yeah.
That's going to indicate gastrointestinal disturbances, digestive problems. Okay, next slide. Okay, another trip down ulcer lane here. Y'all see that there?
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody notice anything in particular?
It's a noise alarm.
Yes, thank you. We got ourselves a right eye here.
It's particular. Inflamed nerve root.
Okay, the autonomic nerve wreath. The autonomic nerve wreath is inflamed. See that? And what you'll also notice, somebody pointed this out here. Do you notice that the autonomic nerve wreath is slightly squared off? Y'all follow this? Jeff, oh, you guys are way ahead of me. Thank you. Did y'all get that?
Yeah.
Is that new to anybody here?
No.
Okay, well, we'll cover it then.
Isn't that also diverticulitis?
What you'll we'll skip it. We'll forgo the diverticulitis for a moment because that's getting too far ahead of us. But we do have a little bit of a squared off autonomic nerve wreath, and so I did want to point that out here. When the autonomic nerve wreath is squared off, and this is slightly squared off, you can see a tendency towards like a bit of a cornering effect there. The corners are usually going to be up, northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest, as opposed to like north, south, east, and west. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
130, 430, 730, 1030, so to speak. That's easier, all right. At least I didn't have to do it metric, or Celsius. Or kilograms, or whatever. All right. I have to convert everything down here. At any rate, the squared off autonomic nerve wreath will indicate in many cases what John terms a death wish. Now, if you want to be really finicky about it, ultimately all judgment is a death wish. And ultimately all resistance is a death wish. But on a more, shall we say, more specific level, there will be many individuals that have some very serious death urges. You get a lot of a lot of the word patterns like "I want to die," "I don't want to be here," and so forth and so on. What you will find is that when people are able to let go of the death wish, what you will find when people are able to overcome this pattern is the autonomic nerve wreath will no longer have that squared off look. Now, from the standpoint of muscle testing, how does a square test? A square will tend to weaken. How will a circle test? Okay, a circle will tend to strengthen you, a square will tend to weaken you. So the death wish is basically represented then by the form that would weaken the body by the square. How many of you have seen squared up autonomic nerve wreaths in yourselves? Anyone here? Okay, well hopefully we'll be able to change that. Is Mag back there? Oh, okay, well we'll get her to talk about her no longer square autonomic nerve wreath one of these days. Yes.
When you do notice this in somebody, do you discuss it with them?